All right. Well, we want to say thank you so much for being here, for coming to hear us talk. We're really excited to talk with you today, and thanks for everybody who's tuning in live as well. Excited to be doing that. Last time I did a live video, it was a Monday Fun Day, and I ended up with whipped cream all over my face, so hopefully that doesn't happen today. Looking at you all, but we're excited to talk to you and have some fun. My name is Kathleen Rhodes. I'm a children's program counselor here at the Hazelden Betty Ford Center, and we'll tell you a little bit about our program, and today we're going to be talking a lot about whole family healing and with a focus on parenting and recovery. And I'll let Lindsey introduce herself too.
I'm Lindsey Chadwick, and I'm also a counselor here at the children's program. We also have Heather and Robbie in the back, so if at any point you have other questions, raise your hand, y'all. You can talk to them as well. And then you probably know Cass, but Cass is in Minnesota today, so she couldn't join us. But we're just really excited to talk a little bit about parenting and recovery. We have felt that it's something that we get a lot of questions about, and a lot of our clients who come through our program afterwards are just still asking questions about parenting and how to talk to their kids and what to say. And so this is kind of a new presentation for us. Usually we talk about kids, and we're really passionate about working with kids and giving them a space to talk and to be free and to have that recovery themselves. But we also know that if we can empower parents with knowledge, how much that's going to help their kids in the long run. So that's a little bit more about what we're focusing on today.
So we want to start by just telling you all a little bit about our program. I know a lot of you know about it, but sometimes it can be helpful to just have a frame of what the bread and butter is of what we do before we kind of look at this other piece that we're working on as well. Do you want to go over some of the basics?
Sure.
Great.
So it's a 4-day psycho-ed program. It's a Thursday through Sunday. We do it twice a month. And in that group, we're working with kiddos on Thursday and Friday to teach them about what addiction is, how someone gets it, all through role play and games, so that they can really have that language in order to express their feelings, express themselves, and talk about the things that they've been through with their loved one's substance use. And then on Saturday and Sunday of that group, we have a caregiver come in. It can be the person who's had addiction. It can also be any other safe adult for that child. So we know sometimes that person's not available or doesn't have 30 days of recovery. If they do, we'd love to have them. If not, no big deal. This is all about kids. So we give their caregivers the same language that we give kids, and we do some family communication activities, a few of which we're going to talk about today, where kids get to express what that addiction's been like for them in order to move the whole family forward in recovery. So that's kind of our basic 4-day. It's really fun. We take the kids swimming. We do fun stuff. You've probably seen a bunch of the activities around our office. We really want to make learning and talking about feelings really fun and normal for kids. And then like I said, parents have to have 30 days of recovery, but just have them give us a call, and we can find a way to make it work for families. We also never turn away anyone to the inability to pay. All of our follow-up resources are free as well, so we don't want money to be an issue. We're a nonprofit. We're funded through the Daniels Fund, so we're really lucky to be able to meet families where they're at financially, which is pretty cool.
All right. Yeah. Any other questions about basics of what we do? And again, double remind you, no child is turned away. So you're obviously here at the Betty Ford Center Children's Program, and we really try and do all that we can in the spirit of Mrs. Ford. And she talked a lot about resilience and how important it is for kids and for families to be resilient. And when I think about both kids being resilient and also parents being resilient and families being resilient, I can't help but think of a family that I got to work with just about 6 months into working here. I got to meet this little kiddo who came into group, and she was so sweet and quiet and nervous and didn't know it was okay to talk about her feelings. And you know, as the day went on, she got a little bit more comfortable and finally drew a picture about how her mom used to leave her at home alone a lot, and she was really scared and didn't know how to take care of herself. And the next day she came back in and talked a lot more about that and how hard it was and how scared she was and how she just felt like her mom was choosing drugs over her over and over again. And she just wanted her mom back, and she was so scared and sad. And now mom was in treatment. She went to a deferment program rather than going to jail, and this kiddo was in foster care and had been through a lot of really hard things. And so, you know, getting to spend the first 2 days with this kid, I was really, really connected with her story and how difficult that was for her. And I knew her mom was coming in the next day, and I just wasn't quite sure what to expect of this woman who had hurt her child so much. And so, kiddo comes in Saturday morning. Mom's not there yet. She gets there with her foster care mom. And they're sitting around, and the door opens, and in walks this lady full of tattoos. And this little girl jumps off of the couch and runs and leaps into her mom's arms, just so thrilled that she's there, so happy. And then she runs back over to me, and she grabs my arm and pulls me over, and she goes, "This is my mom. This is my mom. This is the lady I've been telling you about." She loves her so much. And it hit me at that moment that I am not doing this little girl any favors by holding a bias against her mom, by being angry or upset about all the things that happened. It's my job to love her just as much and to support her journey and her recovery and to help them find healing together, to repair that bond. That's what's the best for this little girl. And sometimes it can be so easy to see all of the hard things that kids go through and be really unsure about what's going on with that person who's raising them and not doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. But when we can really look at what they have left instead of what they've lost, we can really start to repair. We can look at the future, move forward. We can build resilience in a family. And that's the one thing that's been common in every story that I've ever been a part of here is that kids love their parents. They just want them in their life. And no matter what happens, they will always have that love for them. And we have to as well.
I think what Kathleen said, that's the most important piece about working with parents in recovery is just meeting them in a non-judgmental place. They already have so much of their own shame and guilt from that if you come in and are going to meet them with that, obviously that's not going to work. And I know you all in this room know that. But another thing we really want to bring up before we get started on some of the other information is that we are going to be talking a little bit about parenting and how parenting can be triggering. However, we want to make sure that you know that kids are not triggering. It's not their fault. That we believe that kids are just being kids. It's not their fault that they can burn the house down. I say that to kids all the time. You could burn your house down, and your mom or dad could still choose not to drink or use drugs. So we really want to make that clear that we're not talking about blaming kids for their parents' relapse or addiction or their stress, but we're really talking about how that parenting can be triggering at times. So kind of like Kathleen said, we want to set the stage a little bit for the activities that we're talking about, for the information that we're going to be giving you. This is our taken from Families First curriculum of the 5 protective factors of family resilience. And I won't go through all of them, but all of the activities, all the things we're going to be speaking about touch on these 5 things. So parental resilience, giving parents skills and tools and knowledge in order to do their best as parents. Social connections for the whole family is really important. Concrete support in times of need. Knowledge of parenting and child development. And social and emotional competence of children. And we just put that in there so you kind of understand the context of where we're coming from, when we're talking about resilience.
I also really like this model because it looks at lots of different parts of the family. The family's resilience and wellness is not reliant on one person. Each person in the family has their own part to play to create their family resilience. So we look at social and emotional competence of children. We look at knowledge of parenting. Those are all separate pieces that come together to form a really resilient family. So it's just a funny, just a quote about parenting. It's hard. It's really, really hard. It's a dangerous world physically and psychologically, and parenting is a really hard part of that. Parenting is hard for everybody, but especially for people who are in early recovery, because it can be really difficult. It's one of the things that I've noticed brings up the very most shame and the very most fear and the very most difficulty for people in managing their emotions, because they're so connected to these little people that they're raising. And it's really, really tough when someone is in early recovery to also manage all of those really big, difficult feelings. And so we know that it's really tough. So we want to talk about some of the triggers that we see parents experiencing. The number one that we see and hear about is guilt and shame. And this shows up in a lot of different ways for people. We hear things like, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad parent, how could I have let this happen to my kids? How could I have put my kids through this? How could I have left them? How could I have hurt them? We hear, my kids must hate me because I've hurt them so much. They must be so disconnected to me. They're so angry at me. All they do is yell. That must mean that I'm just such a bad parent. Feeling really bad. I have to make up for it. How can I make up for the past? I just want things to go back to normal. I want them to be okay. How do I make up for that harm that I've done? And then one thing that we hear from so many parents, especially, is I'm so worried my kid is going to live the life that I've lived because I've shown them the way. Look what I've done, not just to myself and my own family, but look what I've done to their future. And that's a thought that really holds a lot of shame for people. And when things are coming up, when somebody goes home from treatment and they have, their kids are being difficult, or, something's happening at school that they're not sure how to deal with, guilt and shame show up really, really fast. And it takes people offline from being able to make choices and move forward in ways that are going to be really helpful. And when people are acting out of their guilt and shame, they tend to either overindulge, try and make up for things by, getting gifts and everything's okay, or they get really, really rigid. I've been really lenient in the past, I've not shown up for you, so now I'm going to show up and we're going to do this and we're going to do it right. And it's hard for people to find the balance between those that they really need to when their guilt and shame is what's telling them to do that.
And I have a question. Do you think this is just the parent who's in recovery from substance abuse? No. We see this same triggers, same behaviors from, quote unquote, the other parent in the family, still struggling with that overindulgence. Yeah, Duke?
So I just never did I say the ages that the kids are?
Thank you. 7 to 12. We make exceptions on either end. Thanks for saying that.
Mm-hmm. Like Lindsey was saying, too, though, it can be other parents. It can also be grandparents. We see it show up for grandparents, too, especially when their biological kid is the one who's struggling with alcohol and drugs. And, oh, my gosh, I must have messed it up. It's my fault, because I don't know one parent who's not had that thought cross their mind that it's their fault that their kid is using. But now I'm going to do everything that I can to keep this one from doing the same thing. So they tend to get even more rigid.
They also really struggle with that lack of energy and, the lack of child development. And grandparents, they know how to be grandparents, and that's what they should be doing. And trying to find that line of now you're parenting, how do you do that? So, and then again, just that word, we're going to use the word parenting, but that does not necessarily mean biological parent. That means any caregiver parenting a child.
All right, some more triggers.
So a big trigger for a lot of grown-ups that we hear is that lack of support. Whether that's difficult and lost relationships during addiction, we hear a lot of times. We had a mom who felt really guilty asking her mom to take care of her kid while she would go to meetings because, I think we were just talking about this, about how, mom doesn't trust that her daughter is actually going to a meeting. Or she took care of my kid the whole time I was in my addiction. Now that I'm in recovery, I have to take care of my child all the time. So it's not okay for me. I've exhausted those resources. Or just that cutoff, my friends, my family, they don't really trust me. They're not around for me anymore because I lost that during my addiction, and they're still working on those relationships, so I might not have a lot of that support outside of it. So the other thing, too, that comes into that is that fear of asking for help. It's a huge resiliency skill that we teach kids about all the time, and sometimes we forget to teach adults that, too. So talking to them, it's okay to ask for help for resources, ask for a meeting that has childcare, or asking a friend or a sponsor who can help you so that you can get to the things that you need to do, because your recovery has to come first. And just balancing that life in recovery, we have parents who do kind of like where they overindulge or underindulge, where some parents are like, okay, all we're going to do is AA, all we're going to do is Al-Anon, all we're going to do is recovery. And they forget to have fun. They forget that their kids are kids, and, we've had kids who are like, I have to go to another Al-Anon meeting, and, they're just tired of it. They don't want to live that their whole lives. That's just too much is too much for a lot of kids and families. And then we have the other side where parents put their recovery last, and they don't do anything that they need to do for their sobriety because they're thinking, I can't make, we've even heard parents say, I can't make my kid go to this program because I've already made them do so much during my addiction. So they don't want to get the help. Or I can't go to that meeting because I can't miss a soccer practice. So they have a really hard time balancing that, and that's something that leads to parents having lack of support still, or just not knowing what's out there. I think that's a huge part of it, too. A lot of our grandparents, we talk about kinship meetings, and there's a lot of grandparents raising kids meetings. There's a lot of stuff out there that they're just not really aware of. Because, when you're working with people in addiction and that chaos, they're so in it, they don't always know about the stuff outside of it. So helping them kind of find that support can be really difficult, too.
Yeah. Lindsey was talking about that fear of asking for help, and there's this thing that I've been noticing and I see in a lot of parents where there's something innate, I think, that comes in a lot of parents that they feel like they should just know. that they should just know what to do. I should know how to do this. These are my kids. I should know what to do. And that's just not the case. Especially when we look, and we'll talk about this in a minute, if we look at, how were they raised? What was their model in parenting? Do they really know? Did anybody really teach them? And it's so scary for them to ask for help because they feel, again, guilt and shame comes up because, why don't I know how to do this? Why can't I figure this out for myself? There's a lot of fear there. And the other thing that happens is every once in a while on a Thursday morning, we'll get a grown-up in parent group who's sitting there like this. They don't want to be there.
Thursday morning.
Because a lot of times they're the ones who've been really locked up in the system. And their kids have talked about stuff, and it's gotten them in big trouble. And the parents are in there like this, and the kids are in there like this. Can't make me talk. Can't make me talk. Because they've learned, right? So it's really, really scary for kids and for families in general to ask for help, especially when the system's been involved. Because as soon as a kid might start talking, social services shows up. That person's not in their life anymore, who they love and trust and want to be with the very most. It's really hard to ask for help, especially when those things have happened in the past. And so I think for parents, especially who've been through the system, there's even more fear of asking for help, right? The system came, they said they were going to help me, maybe I got a class or two, maybe I didn't get that much out of it. So how could I ask for help again? They're going to take my kids away, right? I've got to prove that I know what I'm doing this time. So people get really, really independent in that, and they stop asking for help. And we know, right? It's a saying that we all know. It takes a village. Yeah. It takes a village, right? People need help. People need resources. And we can't do this stuff alone. So we've got to be reminding people that it's okay to ask for help. So looking at lack of parenting skills really comes in when we look at this generational cycle of addiction. And we've tended to start looking at it less as a generational cycle of addiction and more as a generational cycle of chaos. These families are in chaos, and even if there wasn't addiction around, even if it wasn't present, even if they didn't see what was going on, they felt the chaos. And so we want to acknowledge that a lot of the caregivers we work with grew up in homes where there was addiction and chaos, and they didn't learn the skills that they need now to move forward, and they need to learn them. Parenting is a skill that they're either trying to relearn and do sober, completely different than before, or they're just discovering it for the very first time. Some people have been using their child's whole life, and now they're sober and they're this whole different person, and they've got to figure out kind of what fits for them, what works for them. Is that what was in the past, or is that now? And not knowing that, the more you know you don't know, right? You start searching, and then you find out like, oh, I got to look more. But if people don't know to look in the past at what they learned, they're not going to know what to do moving forward. And then, of course, we know that a lot of people in recovery have a really difficult time with trauma and emotional management. And parenting is a really important time to be emotionally managed and to be able to show up as a calm presence for kids. And so it's important to note that when people are triggered by things, it's really hard for them to show up for their kids. And the thing with kids is that their behaviors aren't going to wait until mom or dad's not triggered. Their behaviors happen when they happen. And if people don't know how to ground themselves and get in the right mind frame to be interacting with their kiddo, then they're going to be reacting out of trauma. They're going to be reacting out of that dysregulation. And that can be a really big trigger because it can lead to, mistakes and guilt and shame and all of that stuff.
We have a great-grandma that we work with. She's a great-grandma raising her great-granddaughter. Her daughter died from her addiction, and her granddaughter, this little girl's mom, is currently active in her addiction. And she's fabulous. We absolutely love her. But she's 85 and raising an 8-year-old. And she's not any regular 8-year-old. She's a sassy dance queen who speaks her mind. She's just she's really sweet and cute, but, a normal 8-year-old. So Grandma, when she first came through our group, didn't really have any understanding of addiction the way that we think of it now. Grew up in the South and really thought of it more as a moral issue. She also had very limited knowledge of parenting, really. A lot of it came from her day and her parents, and the way she raised her kiddos was different. Also, her husband is an alcoholic, or he's since passed, but so Chad's just been living in chaos for so long. So when she came here and she all of a sudden has custody of this 8-year-old, has no idea what's normal. She's like, she's so crazy. She runs around all the time. We're like, yeah, that's 8. You know, it's not necessarily trauma. That's just 8 also. So, you know, for her, it's been really awesome to watch her kind of progress. They've been coming through our weekly meetings and starting to learn, like, the first time her 8-year-old messed up, she had her literally write on a chalkboard. Like, you're going to write, or I don't think it was a chalkboard, but write like 8.
Piece of paper, yeah.
A piece of paper, 100 times, I will not do that, I will not do that. We were like, that doesn't really work. Yeah.
Maybe try something else.
Kind of stuff like that, just like kind of not knowledge of that discipline and a way to fix that. And so she's had to learn a lot about parenting in a whole new generation. And that generational gap, and it's huge, is she's doing really well, but she really had to reach out and ask for help and find some new ways to do things. And luckily she's been really receptive and sweet and really acknowledging how her upbringing has really affected her. And she's had a whole new way of looking at addiction, and her, you know, her granddaughter's doing great. And that fear, I've raised 2 addicts already. Like, I'm going to do this again. And so that was really a big fear for her. We had to really help her understand, too, that that wasn't her fault. And she's doing things different now, and that's all that really matters.
Yeah, that fear can really keep people from moving forward. Thinking of a couple specifically, too, who one of the parents is like, I'm terrified they're going to be addicts, so I'm going to do this, and this. And the other parent is like, well, I can't control that, so hope they don't. And they're very much at odds with their parenting plan and how they're going to help their kids be resilient. And so it really just keeps people from moving forward. They're so stuck between, we need to do this, well, there's nothing we can do, but we need to do this, that it's making it really hard for them to build resilience in their children. Okay.
So we've talked a little bit about the things that we see that are coming up and some of the difficulties that people are facing. And so we want to move to talking about some of the things that we can do. So hopefully everyone here is aware of Claudia Black. She's the best. And she came up with the 3 rules of family addiction, or as we like to say, family dysfunction. And that's don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And so in looking at these rules and the things that are going on during addiction, what we really try to do for grown-ups, for kids, is to learn to start breaking some of these rules.
Absolutely. And they're hard to break. It takes time.
And practice.
Right? We tell families a lot, you don't run 5 miles into the woods and expect to get out in 3. You got to go the whole 5. It takes a long time. And kids don't always adapt to change as quickly. And sometimes grown-ups don't adapt to change very quickly. And it's really hard to do things in a different way. I talk, too, about kind of this idea of watershed, where we can look at the pavement and see where the cracks are in the pavement. And we know that that's the way water's going to flow. It's going to flow in the cracks because that's the way it's easiest for it to flow. And if we want the water to flow a different way, we have to put a dam in the crack. We have to redirect the water until it creates a new path of least resistance that's going to help. But we have to leave that dam there for a while. We have to really think about how we're changing the flow of water. And this happens for families, too, and for parents. It's really instinctive, the way that parents respond to their kids. And we want to teach them ways that they can put a dam up so that they have a second to think about it, and they can move the water a different way and do things in a different way. But it takes time for new paths to be created, right? For a lot of people who are in early recovery, something happens in their life and their first thought is use, right? And the longer they practice, they feel use and they find the dam and they do something different, the easier it becomes to do something different. And then that becomes the instinct, right? So we want to teach kids and parents and families to kind of do this same stuff and just know that it takes time. We want to help them, slow down. A lot of grown-ups, they've been through treatment, they're gung-ho, they get to our program and they're like, yeah, we're going to fix this family. And we're like, okay, but let's take some steps, and take a step back. And sometimes we have to go through some of the pain first in order to find that healing. And so we want to talk about how we help families heal, and especially for parents, ways that they can break these rules with their kids and build healthy relationships. So we're going to follow those same rules, the Claudia Black rules, but we're going to change it up a little bit. Don't tell her, because we really think that trust needs to be built first. So it goes don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, but we're going to first talk about trust, because we think that especially with kids, that's the thing that needs to be built first. Can I talk about trust?
So, and obviously the opposite of don't trust is be trustworthy. So one thing that we talk to a lot of parents about and that we encourage other professionals to talk to their clients about is ways that they can gain trust back. I'm sure you've heard that from clients all the time. They leave treatment or they start to get sober, like, I've been sober 3 months. Why is everyone giving me a hard time? Or why isn't everything perfect? We always try to tell families, and that happens on the other side too. We'll have a mom call and say, he's been sober, he just got out of treatment, but things are really hard. Yeah, that's when actually the hard work starts, is when someone starts to get sober. So we try to really help clients be trustworthy by having open and honest communication. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but being able to talk to their kids about what they're doing, where they're going, and being accountable. A lot of parents call and say, I don't want my kid to know I'm an addict. I don't want them to know that I drank or that I used drugs. And a lot of that comes from their own guilt and shame.
Woo. I mean, we say it so much. We should come up with a new word.
Is that it? No. Guilt and shame. I'm going to say that like 4 more times. So where they don't like to think of themselves as that way. And we really have to work with them through that, because for a lot of kids it's so helpful to finally know what's been going on, to put a name to it. That's why you were sleeping all day, not because you don't care about me. That's why you were gone, not because you don't care about me. That's why you go to those meetings, not because you don't care about me. There's a theme here. So we really want parents and caregivers, and even if it's on the other side, we just talked to a grandma who's been telling her daughter that her granddaughter that mom's been at work this whole time. And that's just not really helpful for kids, because A, they're going to find out, and what are they going to think then?
Why'd they lie?
Yeah, they lied. They're not being honest. I'm not worthy of the truth. I can't trust my own feelings. So we really know that open and honest communication is really helpful. And we'll talk a little bit about how that can look, but that's a big part of it. And also staying consistent. Actions speak louder than words. So we experience a lot of kids who are little recovery coaches and watchdogs after their grown-ups get sober. Where are you going? What's in your drink? What time are you going to be back? Who are you going to be with? They're the mom and dad, and the adult is the kid all of a sudden. So we want to help flip those roles. But part of that, you can't take that away from kids right away. And they're asking because they care. And that's part of your burden, is to prove your trustworthiness. So for a long time, parents and caregivers have to say, I'm meeting with a friend, I'll be back at 4:30. And then you better do your best to be back at 4:30. So those actions are really going to speak a lot louder than words. And you all know that people sometimes in early recovery, they got a lot of words. So really helping them match that and understand that they have to follow through with the things that they say. And just be okay with their kids doing that. We also try to talk to kids about, we say all the time, you're fired from that job. You're not your dad's recovery coach. And try to give them some peace, but it's also important for them to learn that through their grown-ups' actions. And that also counts for consistency as far as rules. And we'll talk about that a little later too, but a lot of times, like Kathleen was saying, parents are like, okay, well, I'm in recovery now, I'm going to be a good dad, so here's the 40 rules of our household, and this is all we're going to do. And kids are like, okay, well, and then the next day, dad's tired and doesn't feel like dealing with it. That inconsistency is a really huge trigger for kids of relapses happening, or they're using. And just not feeling safe when things are different every day. They wake up, what do I expect? And that's the chaos of addiction. So the opposite of that, obviously, is consistency. So we try to help grown-ups come up with simple rules, simple ways that they can talk to their kids about discipline, and keeping that consistent as well so kids know what to expect. Mm-hmm. And then keep trying, keep listening, don't give up. Parents make mistakes. That phrase, do the next right thing, that applies to parenting as well. And we talk to grown-ups about that all the time. Just because you made a mistake this time doesn't mean you can't go back and try different the next time. Or sometimes it takes a while to figure things out. And it's okay if you have a bad day and you do something you maybe wouldn't have done normally. You can keep working on it. Don't give up. Don't just say whatever and go back to the old ways. So that takes a lot of encouragement as well.
Mm-hmm. And kids are really good at pushing buttons, mm-hmm. right? And if things have been really lax and kids have been able to do whatever they want, and then all of a sudden there's rules and boundaries that they're supposed to follow, they don't want to do that right away, right? They've got to push and find the boundary. They're not going to just take it for, mom saying, here's the boundary. They're going to need to feel it and see that it's actually there and test that mom's actually going to follow through with it. And so we get a lot of grown-ups coming in saying, oh, when are they going to trust me again? Or when can I be the mom again? And it takes a lot of time. And, really don't give up is what we keep telling them. We had a mom in our group not too long ago who had a 13-year-old girl going on like 30. She was very, very ahead of her time, wise beyond her years. She had been on her own a lot, so she learned to kind of rely on herself and not her mom. And on Saturday, after our group, they went home, and they were having a pretty good evening. And then at 9 o'clock at night, the daughter asks if she can have some coffee. And Mom says, no, you can't have any coffee. And she says, well, when you were using, you didn't give a crap what I did. And I could drink all the coffee that I wanted. So what are you going to do? And Mom came in the next morning just so scared. She was like, oh, we had this big fight. She wanted coffee. I didn't let her have any, and then she threw this in my face, and I was feeling really guilty and ashamed, and I didn't know what to do. And we were like, well, what did you do? She was like, I didn't let her have coffee. And all the parents were like, yeah, you did it, all right. Like, she was really upset, and she was pushing her boundaries. But Mom stood strong. She stayed consistent. This is a really important thing. You're 13 years old. You don't need to have coffee in the middle of the night. You know, it's time to get winding down for bed. But by staying consistent, it really helped reestablish that, like, this is an important rule, and I'm going to hold to it, even if you're mad at me. Because, you know, again, we have to tell a lot of parents it's not your job to make your kids feel happy all the time. It's your job to help them grow, and part of that is saying no. And staying consistent can be really, really tough in those moments where kids are pushing buttons and guilt and shame's coming up.
Part about that story, too, is that little girl felt a lot more loved than if her mom had given her the coffee.
Yeah.
She's thinking about my well-being. You know, she's doing what's right for me. She's trying to be a mom. And that's how the message that girl got, even if in the moment she was like, I didn't get my coffee. Mm-hmm. You know?
And it's almost this, like, counterintuitive thing, too, where, you know, to give in might feel better for the relationship in the moment, right? Well, if I just give her coffee, she's going to be happy with me. She'll come sit on the couch. We can snuggle a little bit. And it seems like that might be relationship building, but it's not. What's really relationship building for a parent and a child is boundaries. And for them knowing, like, when I push against this, it's going to stop me from falling. It's going to be there. This is my railing. And that's what builds that connection and attachment to a parent. So we want to give you some activities that we share with our grown-ups as well that you can share with people who are trying to work on building that connection with their kiddo. One night a week, family night. So important for families to have fun together in recovery. You know, we know that it's important for people who are in recovery to have fun sober. It's just as important for families to have sober fun together, too. And it's really the thing that kids want the most. They just want time with the people that they love. We also suggest a lot of families to have 1 hour per week for each child to just have special time. That's what's going to really create those bonds. When a grown-up can get down on the floor with a kid or just throw a ball or play some Legos for a while, that's what they're craving. That's what they need. And that's going to build a stronger connection, and that's going to help with holding boundaries. One family meeting per week. This is just a time for families to have open communication with each other. How's the week going? What's going on? This sets us up to be consistent. Here's what we're going to do on Tuesday night at 4 o'clock. You're going to get picked up, and then we're going to go and have dinner together. And kids know. They're going to hold on to that, especially kids in our group. It's so common that we get questions about, okay, when's lunch, and when are we going to the swimming pool, and how much longer until this? Like, they know, and they're very curious about it because they're so hypervigilant about watching for consistency and what's going on, and are you actually going to do what you say you're going to do? And when we can put a family plan in place and have a meeting about it, that's going to help kids know what to expect. It's also going to help them when things change, when the plan changes, you can talk about it and have a conversation about sometimes the plan changes and sometimes we shift, and it doesn't mean that somebody relapsed, but things change and we can be flexible with them. So it really sets them up in a nice way. And then bedtime feelings is a really fun one. It's one that models a lot of what we do in the children's program. How it works is each kid gets a time, whether that's at night or in the morning or in the car. Families get to decide what works best for them, and just a time to share a couple feelings that they feel. And then the grown-up, whoever is listening, just listens and doesn't respond right away. Because we know that, especially when people are in early recovery, they are working on their feelings management, right? So if a kid is sharing a feeling, well, I felt really, upset when Dad did this or whatever. And maybe mom's thinking, oh boy, I'm really mad at Dad now too. Well, let me hold on to that. Let me go and call my sponsor, call a friend, take a minute, journal a little bit, and then tomorrow you can respond in a way that your kid really needs to hear rather than out of your own stuff. So that's a really important one for parents and caregivers to really know that the important part is processing their own feelings before they respond, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
So it's important to trust in others as well. And I think this is something that's really hard for parents to do. We talked about that, asking for help, and how hard it is to ask for help and find people that they can trust, especially when they probably have maybe made some poor relationship choices in the past, and not just romantic, but even friendship choices. So really helping that parent start to trust in others is really important, and them maintaining their sobriety. But so finding a safe community, of course, there's all the ones about sobriety, but there's a lot of parenting communities out there. We highly recommend Circle of Parents through Families First. They do free parenting groups for dads, for grandparents, for parents raising kids with disabilities, all kinds of different little niche groups, and they have just general parenting ones as well. And they also have a Circle of Parents in Recovery group. That's really awesome. So again, just talking to them about asking for help, connecting them with parenting classes, skills, books. So we will give you some later, but we have some really great parenting and recovery books to share. And for people who like to read, that can be a really good resource as well, especially if they are struggling with time management and getting places and don't have a car. There's always something. There's online classes. There's always something. So really, we find that helping parents connect with other parents, connect with other professionals, get that help that they need, it's really going to help them learn to start trusting others.
And this, along with a lot of the other, breaking the rules parts of this, a lot of this is general recovery work, right? But it's really important for people to kind of take that extra step. And, there's that saying of, like, we practice this in all of our affairs, and parenting needs to be another one of those affairs. And so just to translate some of this recovery work into specifically parenting is really important for people. So we're going to talk about the no-talk rule and ways that we can break it. Talk about it. So important. It's one of the things that we say over and over again throughout our 4-day group. We probably say it like 75 times. So kids deserve to know the truth. That's really important. And I was talking a lot this morning on the phone to somebody about the importance of telling the truth. And a lot of times what happens is people don't want to tell their kids the truth because they don't want them to worry. But kids are already worried. And they're going to worry no matter what. And isn't our time better spent teaching them ways to deal with their worry? Teaching them healthy ways to cope with when they're afraid? Kids need to know the truth, because once they know it, then they can do a lot of stuff around managing their own feelings about it. If we don't ever give them the opportunity to manage how they feel about something, we're really doing them a disservice. Because when they don't know what's going on, typically they're going to blame themselves. Why isn't that person there? Why don't they love me enough to stop? But when we can explain it in a healthy way for kids, they just understand a little better, and they know that it's not their fault. We know that kids are affected no matter what. We hear from a lot of people that, my kid was never home, or, I only used when they were sleeping. But there's fighting going on, and there's chaos, and people aren't around, and I'm losing relationships, and there's all of this other chaos surrounding our family. And if kids don't understand why that's happening, again, they're going to blame themselves, and they're going to be really confused about it. And then kids need permission to talk to safe people. We want parents to know that it's really important for their kids to talk to them, but it's just as important for them to talk to people outside of the family, for them to talk to other safe people in their lives, coaches, teachers, counselors, aunts, uncles, other family members. It's really important for kids to have lots of safe people in their life who they know they can go to and talk to. And they need permission to do that a lot of times. Sometimes we'll get a kid in our group, and on Thursday, they're just like clammed up all day. You're not going to talk. You can't get me to say anything. I won't break this rule. No way. This is my family. You don't get to know about it. And so we'll just have a conversation with their grown-up at the end of the day and say, like, hey, talk to them tonight. Just give them permission. Just let them know that this is a place where they can talk about things. And they come in Friday, and they're like, hey, I got lots of things to say, because they've had permission to do it, to talk about it. A lot of kids have been told by their grown-ups in the past, like, don't ever talk about this. Don't tell your dad. Don't tell your mom. Don't tell your teacher about this. Keep it a secret. And so they need that permission. Cool.
So we have some really simple language. Parents and caregivers call us all the time and say, I don't know how to tell my kid about where I'm at or what I'm doing or my recovery or my addiction. So we have a pretty simple sentence that we give them. Mom, dad, sibling, whomever has a disease called addiction. They need more and more alcohol and drugs, and they can't stop. one sentence. Some other things that we know it's important for kids to hear is that it's not your fault. Nothing that you did caused this. You can't, we talk about the 3 C's. You can't cause it, you can't control it, you can't cure it. That's really important for kids to hear too. And not necessarily all at once, but these are messages that we think that they can hear later. Do you want to do the next one?
Yeah.
Some other important talking points. Whether you as a professional are doing this, because maybe parents aren't quite ready to have this conversation, and that's okay. It's okay to talk about this. What feelings do you have? I want to know your side of the story, things like that. What questions do you have? A lot of times kids have some questions. Sometimes they don't. I think grown-ups are really surprised that when their kids hear it, like, I have a problem with drugs or alcohol, they're like, oh, makes sense. I'm going to go play. Yeah. They're really not as this horrible big thing that sometimes grown-ups, they've obviously been building that up for themselves. And a lot of kids just say, oh, that makes so much sense. But then they'll have questions, and even when they come through our 4-day, they learn all about this, and I always warn parents, like, they're going to have questions for you later. And they'll, come back to their grown-up, like, I remember this one time that you were sleeping, and I couldn't wake you up. Was that when you were using drugs or alcohol? And the parent can say, yeah, that is, a time. So sometimes kids are connecting things, have questions going on. That's why this is an ongoing conversation. This isn't a one-time thing, right? You're not alone. Lots of kids have this problem in their family. We talked to this about parents too. You're not the only parent going through this. There are lots of parents who've been through this and that you can meet with. Again, that sense of community. But kids need to know that too. That's my favorite thing about like a group like ours is that kids come and just see that there's other families going through that same thing. That lowers their shame and guilt so much. I'm just like, I'm not wrong. This is a thing that happens. This is a disease. So when kids know they're not alone, it's really huge. And I think that's one of the most healing things for kids to hear.
Yeah, and as Lindsay's talking about that, I just want to point out to you our map, our pins in this map. Each kid who comes here gets to put a pin where they live, and this is actually our 3rd map for our location because it gets so full. And so it's a really nice visual reminder that we can have the kids look back at, when they're about to do a hard activity or they're feeling really alone or they're finding things in common, and just think, all of these kids who have a pin in the map are just like you. They've gone through the same stuff. It's really, really important for them to know they're not alone.
And then the last thing is just that their job is to be a kid, and it's your job to be the adult. Like we said, those roles get really reversed sometimes. And for a lot of kids, they feel like they have to run everything in their family or take care of their grown-up, or if they're not good enough, their grown-up will drink or use drugs again. So when they're given that verbal permission, it's really good for kids to hear. Because we might think that kids know things. We might think that kids know it's not okay to use alcohol and drugs. But if you don't say it, sometimes they don't know it. So there's really a lot of power in verbalizing some of that stuff for kids.
I think another really important part about what questions do you have is that, that's not just like a one-time thing. For caregivers who are trying to reconnect with their kids, that permission doesn't always feel like it's standing all the time. So we remind people that they've got to go back and say, like, hey, do you have more questions today? Or, give special time for them to talk about that. Because it's pretty rare for a kid to, like, on a random Thursday walk up to Dad and be like, hey, Dad, I've got some feelings I'd like to share with you. They've got to really make some time for it and keep letting them know that it's okay to ask questions. I also suggest the what questions do you have pretty early in the conversation. Sometimes we have all of these ideas about what we think kids need to hear, and that might not be what they need to hear or what they want to hear or what's appropriate for them to hear. So really starting with, here's some basic information. What are your questions is going to allow us to then frame our conversation in a way that's going to be the most helpful for them. So starting with that can be really important too.
And the other thing, what if a kid asks you a question and you don't know the answer? What do you say? I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm going to ask someone, or I'm going to think on that, or I'm not ready to say that right now. I don't know if that's coming up later, but
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely important to say, I don't know if you don't know the answer, and call somebody and let kids know that you're going to work on it. Or, it's also okay for a kid to ask a question and for a grown-up to be like, you know what, I'm not ready to talk to you about that. I need a little more time. Let me work on that part, and I'll let you know about it when I can. Kids don't need to know everything, even if they're asking questions right now. It's okay to say, like, I need some time. And, people don't have to act like they know what they're doing, right? It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to reach out and get some support. All right. So don't feel. All feelings are okay. This is a really important part of our group, and something that we know is important for grown-ups to continue with their kids. There was a study done on our group that showed, A, that it does what we think it does. It helps kids learn that it's not their fault, that it's okay to talk about things. The other thing that it really showed us is that if people aren't continuing the things that they learned in our group, they go away. They stop talking about their feelings if nobody is asking them. So it's really important, again, for grown-ups to be making time to talk about feelings and reminding kids about talking about feelings and modeling them for their kids, showing them how to get regulated, showing them how they reach out for help when they need it, showing them how they go to a meeting, or giving them a little slice of what they worked on in their counseling session. Super important for them to show their kids that it's okay to feel and to ask them about it as well. So again, just more things for clients, especially around parenting. These are things that we think are really important for people to do pretty early in their recovery, to look back at their own childhood. How were you parented? How do you feel about that? Is that something you want to continue? Are there things that you want to do differently? What was helpful? What was hurtful? What from that is a trigger to you as a parent? So when your kid does this, it brings you right back to when your parent responded to you in that way. What can you do instead? Let's talk about self-care. In our group, we talk about a stuffed, heavy bag full of feelings, problems, and secrets that people carry around with them. Everybody has a bag. Some people try and put their bag down by using drugs and alcohol. It works for a while, and then it stops working. And when it stops working is a lot of times when people start to get help. And they learn that, not only are the people they love carrying around these backpacks, but kids have them too, and it's important to talk about them. And these backpacks are filled with a lot of things from childhood. And it's really important, obviously, for people to work those out and also relate that to how that impacts the way that they're parenting, the way that they're relating to their children. There's also been research that shows that doing this work and having this self-knowledge of how people parent actually increases healthy attachment and connection between kids and parents. We talk a lot about this in our parenting workshop, where doing this work and understanding what's going on inside for caregivers is going to help them be their own expert. That's going to help them know more intuitively how to deal with difficult situations. It's going to help them connect with their kids in different ways that they didn't know that they could before. But the work starts here, inside. And asking people about this while they're in treatment, while they're working on that early part of their recovery, is going to help them start thinking about it sooner, so they can go home and really drive that connection.
So another intervention for you all to think about is the self-compassion letter. And we do this with our grown-ups in our parenting workshop, but we have them write a letter to themselves about the things that they're doing right. Sometimes for some of those grown-ups, they have to imagine themselves as somebody else talking to them because they can't quite get there themselves. But this letter has been really important for parents to start looking at the things that they're doing right, reminding themselves that it's okay that they struggle with things, reminding themselves that it's okay if they don't do everything right all the time. Having some of that self-compassion is really going to help with that guilt and shame that just comes up for them so much. Mm-hmm. And that's the Science of Greater Good by UC Berkeley is where we got the information for that, and so that might be something to check out too.
Making amends is another really important step for parents to take. Just giving that verbal recognition of like, hey, I know you were hurt. I know this affected you. I'm really sorry for what happened. It just gives a really nice way for them to move forward. We do an activity kind of like that in our group where grown-ups have an opportunity to make that amends to their kiddo. And it's so powerful when they get the chance to do it. Kids really take well to forgiveness. They're pretty quick to it. And there's also, that verbal part, but then we look at living amends, right? That's the consistency. That's showing up. That's doing your own work. That's taking care of yourself. Doing all of those things that are going to really show a kid, like, hey, things are different. It's the action that speaks even louder than the words sometimes. And just being actively involved. Again, like, this is the thing that kids want the very most. Just show up to the soccer game. Just be there. Maybe catch a meeting at another time. Like, these things are so important to kids. Showing up is a big, big part of building that connection again and moving forward. So just showing up is important. And self-forgiveness, right? When we talk about making amends, we talk to the grown-ups. We say, it doesn't say, like, make a list of everything I've ever done wrong and hate myself for it forever. Like, forgiving self is so important, especially in parenting, because how can a parent show up fully and honestly in a relationship with their kiddo when they're still feeling all this yucky guilt and shame and having all of this hatred towards themselves? So that inner work is really the start towards making amends and towards building that relationship back together. Sorry, just checking my notes. Okay.
Should we read this?
Yeah, I think we have time. This is our last thing.
There's this awesome poem by T.N. Dayton for the National Children of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I'm going to read this to you briefly, but it's a really wonderful way that we think of working with kids. So if children live with parents who are high, they learn that people are unpredictable and unreliable. If they live with alcohol, they learn to mistrust what they feel and sense. If they live with shame, they learn to hide who they really are. If children live with rage, they learn to be afraid. If they live with emotional abuse, they learn to feel bad about who they are. If they live with trauma, they learn to become anxious and despondent. If they live with addiction, they learn to become addicts. If they live with recovery, they learn that people can change for the better. If they live with parents who ask for help, they learn to reach out for help too. If they live with amends, they learn to forgive. If they live with peace in their home, they learn to feel safe. If they live with dependability, they learn to trust. If they live with honesty, they learn to tell the truth. If they live with emotional maturity, they're allowed to be children. It's a pretty powerful way of looking at just because they live with some of these other things doesn't mean that they can't learn other things. And I think parents really need to know that. We also say all the time, like, you brought your kids to this group, or you're getting your kid help, or you're coming to recovery. What an amazing gift you're giving your kiddos. And you're doing things right now, and that's what matters. And you didn't do all that bad. Like, you have great, wonderful kids. They're not broken and damaged. And I think that's what grown-ups are afraid to hear. So the more we can remind them of that, just the better.
And I think a really important part of resilience, too, is, we look at it as kind of an equation, right? There's all of this risk. And if we only focus on the risk, that's where we're headed, right? But when we can work with parents and we look at the resilience, we look at the protection, we look at those positive things in life, and if we can continue to build those, then that's the path that we're going to take. Not to deny that hard things have happened, but it's important that we move forward and we look at the future and we see what we've done right and we learn from it and we move forward to build on that. And that's what we really think is so important and helpful for parents who are being a parent in early recovery and trying to figure this all out. That it's important to talk about their feelings. It's important to ask their kids about their feelings. It's important to reestablish trust and boundaries and consistency in their families, and they've got to talk with their kids. And by doing that work, it is mirroring what they're doing in recovery, and it's really teaching their whole family to be in recovery. We talk a lot about how sometimes we see kind of that family model, and here's all the family here, and here's the person who's using, and they're kind of outside of the family, and we want to bring them inside the family, and the family can work together to defeat addiction when they are together and they're resilient, and they build that connection and that bond again. And so we really love that poem. I think it brings that in. We want to leave you with some resources, some things that we really love the most. This book, Positive Discipline for Parenting and Recovery, is one of my very favorites. A Good Enough Parent is also really great. It was written a long time ago. I think it was written in like the 70s, 80s. It's an old one, but it's so good. And then Straight Talk from Claudia Black, obviously incredible. Families First is a really great resource. They have those Circle of Parents groups that Lindsey talked about. They also have a 24-hour parent support line in English and in Spanish. So if people are just having a really hard time, they need to step away and call somebody and they don't know who to call, they can call that line. We really like Love and Logic. It can be really helpful for people to just learn a different way to interact with their kiddos. Hand-in-Hand Parenting is also a really great parenting program. It talks about connection and coming alongside your child rather than being in opposition to them to teach them what you want them to learn. And then we also have a parenting workshop. It's new. We're just still kind of working out the kinks, but we've done a couple of rounds and been pretty successful. So we're going to open it up to the community. If you have people who are interested in this kind of work, it's a 3-part workshop, and we put flyers on your table. If you have questions, you can ask us about it. We have just maybe 4 minutes if anybody has any questions. We have some resources on here. If you want, I can send you the slides. and we're just so thankful for all you do. Duke.
Thank you, guys. 9 years ago, I brought my kids, ages, I think 8 and 12 at the time. And I've been in this field for only 6 months, and everyone said, you don't want to know about it, just do it. And it was the coolest thing I've ever done in my 29 years of sobriety. And I didn't realize that we were getting ready to kind of go through a divorce, and it really made us emotionally stronger. And even though I've been sober their entire lives, it's been super impactful to be able to have that discussion kind of going forward. Now they're 17 and 21, and they seem to be doing okay. Check back in like 5 years. But what I want to say is, anybody's got kids between the ages of 7 and 12, we are blessed to have these young ladies here taking care of our kids. So thank you for teaching them how to talk to our kids. Secondly, if you know of anyone who's got kids ages 7 to 12, I mean, we have people just getting out of treatment, we have people just getting out of jail. We had grandparents with no parents there. I mean, we had every different background. So one thing I wanted to say, if you are in recovery, don't let them think that your kids can't go through this. Right? Even though you've been sober a long time, in my case, they hadn't seen me drink. It's been really vital to kind of build stronger kids. And, so, I wish I could have a similar fruitful conversations with a 21-year-old and 17-year-old right now. So we're pretty close. But thank you.
Thank you, Duke. Thank you for that.
Thanks for sharing
Appreciate it.
that.
Any other questions?
Do you have a specific policy for parents who might not follow through with their initial appointment the first time around? Is a certain amount of strikes and you're out, or they can keep trying?
We can keep trying. Yeah, we're pretty willing to let them figure it out and come when they can.
It's a 4-day group when they first come. So they just come for those first 4 days, and then there's follow-up opportunities. That's kind of up to them. So typically the only thing that we struggle with that is like people sign up and then don't show up and keep kind of pushing back. And so we just kind of work with them to find the right time. Yeah, Mary.
And working with families, I think it's really important for the addict to really realize how hard it is for the co-addict to start letting that person interfere.
Mm-hmm.
And so lots of times we blame the co-addict for treating him like a child and all that stuff. And well, the trust issue is huge.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest one is to not have any chiding. So go talk to somebody. Don't talk around or her.
Yeah.
And that's a hard one to break.
It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things we've been talking about too, is something that we're working on addressing in our parenting workshop is that co-parenting piece. It's so tough. For now, what we're doing is just sending people Lana's way, doing that, having each other's backs again can be a really helpful start to get back on the same page so that they're moving forward as a team. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary.
And don't forget
Danny.
the power of sharing. This content could really help somebody on social media that's hurting right now and might love these skills. So the purpose of going live in the Family Rockstars business page is that you can all share this, and it has the opportunity to get in front of somebody right now who's hurting, doesn't have answers, doesn't have resources, and is in pain. That's why we do this.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much,
doing that.
Jenny. Thank you all. If you've got other questions, you can find Lindsey or I or Robbie or Heather.
She had to go.
Heather had to leave. Find Robbie or Lindsey or I if you have more questions. Thank you all.